Senator, thanks for joining us this morning. I want to talk first about the Brexit vote. What do you want Ohioans to know? How do you think this is going to affect trade here in Ohio, also jobs, finances, long-term impact?
I talked the next day, I talked to the head of the New York Federal Reserve because he has his finger on sort of the pulse of international commerce that way. I don't think we should be alarmist. I mean, I'm concerned about the vote. It's not my place to comment on how people vote in another country. I'm concerned about it. I think it comes from the fact that people are pretty unsettled about the economy. The economy's worse in Europe than in the United States. We've had consistently a better economy than they have. But at the same time, people, we've seen in our country, we've seen stagnant wages. We've seen 70 plus months of job growth, but it doesn't put enough food on the table in far too many places in Ohio and around the country. But I think one thing we take from this is don't let the bankers in Europe, in the EU or in Britain, try to weaken bank rules and try to scale back some of the reforms we made in the Dodd-Frank bill. And I mean, I know Wall Street wants weaker laws and weaker rules, but you do that in response to Brexit, you do that, it can cause lots more problems, including some of the same problems we had in the United States a decade ago.
Was this also a referendum on inflation, and do you see that spreading into the U.S. this election season?
Well, a lot of people in the U.S. are upset. I can't gauge why the voters of Britain did what they did, whether it was inflation, the economy, or just a general being sort of upset, legitimately upset with the status quo. That we have that same anger here. We've also, though, have an economy that's better than Europe's. That doesn't make you necessarily feel better in Cincinnati or in Cleveland or Dayton or Columbus. But I think that the anger here will be translated come election time into moving this country forward, not blowing everything up. And I think that's kind of where you're going to look at I think the Ohio voters will look at the two candidates that way. That's why I think that while Donald Trump has tapped anger, he's offered no solutions. And he has a demeanor and a behavior that's pretty boorish to a whole lot of Ohioans and pretty unacceptable as the commander-in-chief.
I read that as recently as yesterday, you said you are not going to speculate about vice presidential talk. It ends there, but I haven't asked the question, we haven't as a station, so I am going to ask you. Would you consider being Hillary Clinton's running mate?
Well, I don't think she's going to ask. I'm not going to engage in speculation about what she'll do. I think that because the Republican governor would appoint my replacement, that Secretary Clinton will probably look elsewhere. There are lots of good candidates. I love the job I get to do to serve Ohio in so many ways, to fight for jobs and health care and a cleaner environment and civil rights and all. And I don't really have great desire to get a promotion or whatever you would call that.
All right, fair enough. I know you're focused on something called biologics, and you want to talk about that. I want to give you a chance. Those are drugs that cure rare conditions or treat rare conditions. Extremely expensive. You want to lower the cost. How could that be done?
Well, you lower the cost the same way 30 years ago, we introduced generics as alternatives for name brand drugs. A generic, we give the drug maker a certain number of years to benefit from the patent, then we allowed generics to come in and compete and bring the price down dramatically. We want to do that with so-called biologics. Those are the live molecule drugs that are more and more common. They're often done by infusion. They're often cancer drugs. They're exorbitantly expensive. The drug companies that have developed them have more than made lots of money from their invention after a period of years. And we ought to have what are generics or follow-on biologics that can bring the price down and compete with these name brand companies. It's just too many of these drugs are priced so high that Americans can't buy them. Insurance companies won't pay for them, and people die sometimes as a result, or their families end up in bankruptcy, or they have to take all their savings for this medicine. And we can do better than that. So I've teamed up with John McCain on this bill, a Republican from Arizona. We hope, because it's bipartisan, we can get it going.
Realistically, how soon do you think something like this could be done?
Well, I know that that these companies that produce these drugs, a lot of them give a lot of money to Republican leadership. So it will make it harder to convince them, but I'm hopeful after the election, we're starting it this year, we're going to get some discussion going about it. I'm hopeful after the election, starting next year, that a new president and a new Congress will take a new look at this. Senator McCain and I have worked on this for some time. These drug companies need competition when they're charging these kind of outrageous prices for drugs. Once they've been paid many times over for the research, and I understand the risk and all that. But those drugs that sometimes came out of public research, public dollar-funded research at NIH and universities and foundations, that these drugs need to be affordable to the American public.
Now you say you have some bipartisan support there with Senator McCain. Do you think there's bipartisan support for this initiative that Vice President Biden is undertaking now in terms of condensing the time of cancer research literally to make some of these things happen in 5 years instead of 10? Bipartisan support there as well?
Yeah, I think what Vice President Biden's doing, the cancer moonshot, if you will, and he's working with hospitals all over the state, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, elsewhere. As part of this, it's accelerating the research, but it's also making the drugs available. If the research accomplishes things as it will, we develop new kinds of injectables in cancer treatment, but only the wealthiest people or the people with great insurance can afford it. We leave out half the country from these cures. So it really takes both. It takes a commitment from all of us to do the research, and that includes public dollars in research from the National Institutes of Health, but then it means that every American gets access to these drugs, these new cancer-fighting wonder drugs, at a reasonable cost.
We probably have about 30 seconds left. I'm going to give you a chance just to say something about the Turkish attacks. It looks like the work of ISIS. I'm not sure what the talk is in Washington.
Yeah, we don't know yet. I'm meeting today. We're getting a briefing, a number of us in the Senate, with the Department of Defense and the State Department and security people and the CIA to find out more about what this means and get an update on what we're doing as a country, as a government, to fight ISIS. It's an ongoing battle. It's not going to end soon, but it's something we need to be vigilant. And I assume we'll learn some things today about what happened and make us better able to combat ISIS the way that I know the administration and all of us are trying to do.
Thank you for fitting us in your schedule today. We'll have all your complete comments at local12.com and some in our evening news. Thank you.